Hi, so good day everyone. My name is Paul Patrick Prantilla. I'm from Red Rock IT Security, a local IT security-based company here in the Philippines. It was my pleasure to be invited to give a short talk on this I Am Secure 2021 event from ISOG. So I thought to give a brief talk on practical IT security, especially how it impacts working from home during the pandemic. So let me just share my screen for a bit. All right, um, just to give you guys a brief background on Red Rock ID Security, we are a local group with people with over 15 years of ID security experience across a wide range of industries. We are composed of a lot of people who are PhD and MS candidates. We do place a special emphasis on teaching and learning, hence we have Asia Pacific's only certified trainers for core security. That's basically the most advanced penetration testing platform on the market. And we are consistent winners, basically, on the finals of DEF CON, the world, qualifiers for the finals of DEF CON, the world's biggest hacking conference. Up to now, the only winners of the Black Badge are working with our company as well. So we do, again, place special emphasis on expertise, services. We pay a lot of focus on certifications because our prime focus is really IT security services. So basically, we hope to show you the insights we've gained throughout the years, especially with all the threats that we face. Even before the pandemic, really, the IT threats that we face are always constant and remote. We know that this has happened in the Philippines. We know that this affects a lot of companies in the Philippines. But really, this is just the tip of the iceberg that we are looking at. What we don't see in the news every day are lots of SMEs being targeted and compromised. Even large companies sometimes get targeted and compromised, but we just don't necessarily see that in the news, even if it's being reported properly to the FBC. So one thing to take note is that these companies do spend a lot of money on IT security, but yet so they are breached and hacked. So one reason for that is really it could just take one single click on a malicious file or a URL. For example, clicking this notepad looking file here, svc.host.exe.txt, this file, that could trigger a deployment of a malware by an attack by a malicious agent. You just have to have a user in your organization access a malicious website as well. That's going to obtain the same effect. That's going to give full control of an attacker over the company network. And if that's not enough, even just opening PDF files and allowing PDF files to connect back to the internet, that's going to be another channel to let attackers have access to your computer and therefore have access to the company. They could start moving around the company once they have this initial access. So things didn't really get better with COVID-19. A lot of COVID-related threats in the form of phishing emails started once the virus started gaining traction worldwide. So you could see here a lot of registrations related to COVID-19 domains happened during the first few months of the pandemic. And basically this enabled a whole slew of phishing emails that would last starting from this period. So a lot of phishing has happened in short related to COVID-19. Threats aside from phishing have also happened as well. We've had a lot of cybercrime reports of varying techniques and sources by the FBI. We've had a lot of attacks using Microsoft Word documents related to COVID-19, but still it's really phishing email that encompasses the main bulk of COVID-19 threats. Now, that's not the only threats really that we are at a risk at lately. There has been a lot of ransomware attacks because now since the pandemic started, we've noticed that a lot of companies, rather a lot of ransomware organizations, they try to directly blackmail companies by encrypting or disabling a lot of systems in their own organization and try to get them to pay the ransom. Now, it's interesting because prior to the pandemic, our company would just be assigned to probably one major cybersecurity incident at any one time. Now, since the pandemic started, we've been averaging working on 3 major cybersecurity incidents simultaneously. Our record is actually 5, and they were all ransomware based. So that's something I want to talk about right now. Things have gotten even way more sophisticated than before the pandemic. We've directly observed and worked on probably the most sophisticated phishing scam we've ever seen. And that, yes, it did happen here in the country. And we're pretty much close in touch with the general IT security community, but this was some level of sophistication that we still haven't seen through related literature. So one more thing, a majority of the attacks we've noticed were successful due to phishing, or basically the VPN gateway of the organization was exploited. But since I'm trying to talk about personal security, IT security, and how that could help us in a work from home condition, I'll focus a bit more on phishing during this talk. All right, so how does one get hacked so easily, and how does this lead to entire organizations to be compromised? Now, one way to look at this is that, IT security, despite being so important, it's not being taught in schools. Instead, students are really taught to create programs, software, and do it quick as possible. You have a deadline, put features. That's actually the perfect conditions that can create security vulnerabilities in software. So what's more, even IT professionals, rather, they're not fully aware of how easy it is to get hacked. They are very well aware of how to create mind-blowing applications, but not necessarily how to prevent themselves from getting hacked. So if they are easily hacked, how much more would it be for non-technical people? All right. So you probably see where this leads to. You probably could see why being in the ransomware segment nowadays can be very lucrative, unfortunately, for gaining money, because every one of these people are very likely to be compromised. All right, so just to illustrate that, I typically give this short task for audiences in my speeches. If you access the site called haveibeenpawned.com, you could probably see one of your passwords, your email passwords, that have been reported to be breached, sometime in the past. So my personal email, for example, is in this database. It has been part of a data breach one time or another in the past. Thankfully, my password that was exposed during that time is not something that's reused. But here, if you input your email address and you find out that it has at some point been compromised in the past, therefore its password was known in the past, I'm really hoping that you change your password since then, because one thing an attacker will do is try to reuse that password for your other social accounts, your other email accounts, and whatnot. Okay, the site here is basically haveibeenpawned.com. All right, the link is under there. Yes, you can see on the screen. So now what we're trying to do here is not necessarily prevent, because we have to accept the fact that our accounts will be breached, our systems will be compromised, our organizations will be attacked. But we just have to prepare mitigating that inevitability, all right? So here, let me proceed and talk about how these do happen in everyday life. So one of the most common methods of how individuals get quote-unquote hacked, and therefore organizations, is still this tried and true thing: malicious links. Basically, links and emails that appear to be legitimate, but they try to get the user to click on a link that will lead to a malicious site. So for example, this is a real phishing email, supposedly coming from Netflix. It will ask you, try to get you to log into an account by clicking a link because your account has been suspended. But that's actually not going to go to the real Netflix site. So that's going to take you to a site that looks like Netflix, but just aims to get your username and password. This one on the right is an email sent to one of the SANS Institute instructors. So the SANS Institute are a group of highly trained security professionals, and they do get to see these from time to time. An attacker trying to get them to click on an email as well. They do a lot of research. They know that the reader of this email is Spanish. They know that the reader is expecting a file about a curriculum. So, however, when you look at where this attachment is pointing to, it's actually a malicious URL that's being disguised as a bit.ly.com link. So you have all of these techniques, and sometimes are even effective against IT security professionals. So it's no small wonder why we see everyday people fall for these from time to time, okay? Now, another common way are just simply opening PDF files. So PDF files are, they could be made in such a way that they could exploit or take advantage of the PDF viewer that your computer uses. Once it does that, it can make your PDF viewer do something malicious. And the sad thing here is it's not an executable file. It just serves as an input to a program that has a weakness. And this is another common way how people get their computers compromised, okay? It's really hard, admittedly, to prepare users and customers to be cognizant about this risk. But it's the practical thing here is to just ensure that your PDF readers are always updated so that they don't have that said weakness when they do open a malicious PDF file. Same goes for Word documents. In fact, for Word documents, it's even easier because they can act as programs in of itself through the use of the macro functionality. So this is another common way for attackers to get end users to execute malicious code, sending them Word documents that have malicious macros. And again, it's pretty hard to stop. We've worked with a lot of companies whose IT team really knows about this danger, but they just can't stop it because business says that they need it. Now, our stand is this has always been dangerous, and it will always be dangerous. So at least for people who can implement this restriction, we strongly recommend this. Simply disable macros in Office documents. Now, tips basically to avoid phishing and ransomware is related to what I've shown a while ago. You can turn off automatic hyperlinks off in your email. So that's going to prevent you from clicking disguised URLs. Be wary generally of emails that use language with a false sense of urgency. So these are typically emails that say, go here for more information and whatnot. So we have to be careful of those. I mentioned about disabling macros for any Microsoft Office product. And emails particularly coming from the CDC or WHO, we want to be extra careful of those, okay? Now, generally, we want to avoid opening attachments. For organizations or for that use G Suite, we do recommend the sandbox, the security sandbox option that tries to detonate the malware in a closed environment before forwarding it to the recipient. That's gonna delay the delivery, but it's basically safer all in all right? Now, another thing to get to be cognizant about is dump accounts and shared passwords mean that if your password of your company or your personal email password was part of a breach, as I mentioned earlier, there could be breaches that have millions of email addresses and passwords, like what you see here on the screen. This also affects popular services like Dropbox. So these are pretty old instances, but we still have these regularly. So the thinking here is we should never reuse our passwords in any one site, because the minute that password is exposed in one of these breaches, attackers can basically try to see if you are using that same password on all your other email accounts or your websites. So one big, probably one of the most notable such breaches happened in the past few years include this LinkedIn. Well, not recent, I guess, but it's still in my view quite relevant, because this was a lot of professional email accounts that were basically exposed through this breach. All right, so let's go a bit for talking about how to protect our devices, and I'll also be talking about how to protect our browsing activity and our passwords as well. So the golden rule seems like, well, we've been in this field for almost 20 years. This has never changed. Always update your software. There are multiple ways to do this, but you have to do this on your desktop, your iPad, your iPhone, your PS4, your Xbox, your phones. Everything needs their software to be updated, right? Just make sure that ideally it's automatic, so you don't have to do this and check all of these manually. Lots of people have multiple devices in their home right now. It's too much effort really to religiously check every day whether there's an update or not. So in mobile devices in particular, these sometimes don't require some manual intervention. You need to download and install, but we always recommend that this be done ASAP, because these always have some security improvements. They don't divulge anymore the exact security bugs that their patch is trying to address, but it's really always the best practice to check this religiously. Antivirus options, they're one of the tried and true host-based technical controls for IT security. Now, what we have to know, however, is that antivirus is signature-based. And now it's very easy, and it's often done by attackers where they change the signatures of their same tools. So the same tools that they use, the same malware that they use, they change the signatures. There are other host-based platforms, protection platforms right now that don't only just look at signatures, but they look at behavior as well. These are called EDRs, endpoint detection and response. But please try to consider for, I guess a majority of the people here are using Windows. Please do try to consider Windows Defender. It's pretty effective in as a host-based IT security control. Now, firewalls should always be enabled as well. So for the layman, this is software that prevents certain connections from coming in and even going out of your computer. So these are, in our experience, even in companies, these are regularly turned off because it's quote unquote a hassle if you want to share files or if you want to share printers. On our viewpoint, however, is you have to work around this restriction. There are many ways to share files or to do business in a safe manner that does not require turning your firewall off. For us, this is a must. And in a nutshell, you really just want your computer to communicate with safe sites, and you don't want to just want to allow any other computer to connect to your computer without good reason. Okay. Only installed signed software. So I'm not gonna go to the details on what signed means, but the summary here is that signed software means it's authenticated, that the publisher who signed it is the actual program that the publisher released. All right. So you want to avoid running programs that look like on the lower left, where it says that, oh, you're trying to run mmsetup.exe, but the publisher is unknown. You don't want that. You want to make sure that anything you run on your computer has a verified publisher, and you want to know who that publisher is, right? So here it says Microsoft Corporation. I guess probably all of us know who that is. All right. So yeah, I just want to add that one main trend we've noticed is to get employees who are working from home install what looks like to be legitimate installation programs of Zoom, or even games like Among Us. We've seen instances where Trojanized versions of those programs are being sent, particularly games, because they want to take advantage of kids using the family work computer to install a game. And then people would try to make it look like, if you use this game, you'll have this certain cheat. Now, that wouldn't go through if you have these controls. There's one more control I'll mention as well, but just that's talking straight from experience in one of our incidents. So we hope that you guys take away from that as well. Okay. Here are a few more examples of only installing signed software. So as long as you make sure that there is a publisher, a signed publisher for the file you want to run, Apple, Bailey, and you don't receive something like unknown or there's no publisher, that should be okay. Now, another control is make sure you don't use administrative accounts, and that goes to the any family member as well in your household. So the example I gave a while ago, where a kid received an installer for a game, and the sender of that game installer said, hey, you know, if you use this hacked version, you'll have some cheats, so you'll have some advantage online. So people won't be able to install things in the first place if they are not administrators for their computer. So do ensure that as much as possible, the administrative accounts are only used when installing things on your computer. All right, so let's go to protecting our browser activity. So I mentioned this briefly a while ago, where attackers would want to send email with links in them. They try to disguise the links. Like, let's say here, for example, the get started line sends you to a link outside the email client. It will be opened by your browser, and typically that's a malicious URL. So you could see on the lower left, or on your your mail client, where you would go if you were to click it by just hovering your mouse over that link. Okay, so anything that looks suspicious as well. For example, here, looking at undisclosed recipients for one, having strange requests. This whole thing is strange requests. Those are key signs of malware being sent to you. And this is what looks like when you try to open that link. Now, for most of you, this isn't new. But what I want to stress is that attackers still find ways how to make this still effective. They will not, for example, in In one case recently, like the CEO of a very big company received an email from a close acquaintance, but that email from the close acquaintance had a malicious attachment. What happened was the attackers don't want to send malicious emails straight to that CEO. They try to figure out who are the usual people the CEO talks to. The attacker then tries to compromise their email addresses so that they could use their email address to legitimately send a phishing email. Now, of course, you could have spoofing controls to prevent that, and that is exactly why attackers prefer to actually compromise the actual account of people who would send an email to that CEO. Okay, so in that case as well, it was quite sophisticated. Not only did the attacker try to compromise an acquaintance of the CEO first to get around spoofing controls, but the site, the malicious site that would have directed the CEO to go to was an entirely new domain. It was very specific for this phishing email, so it was not detected as a malicious site. Now, ultimately, the attack failed. There were other controls that were in place. I won't get to that details anymore, but that was a very, very close call. Okay, so it bears repetition that any site with an SSL problem, a security certificate problem, should not be accessed. So a common thinking is that SSL or HTTPS, its advantage is that it encrypts the traffic between the user and the site. The thing is, that's just one half of the benefit of SSL. The other half is actually validating that that site is exactly who it says it is. For example, this PayPal site, this has an encrypted connection between you and quote-unquote PayPal, but it's not, the certificate is saying it does not seem to be who it says it is. So a lot of people would just continue to that website anyway, thinking there's no problem. The connection is encrypted anyway. Well, what's actually happening is that if you continue to this website, it's not paypal.com. It's just another computer or another attacker pretending to be paypal.com. Yes, you have an encrypted connection. Congratulations, but that encrypted connection is between you and an attacker. So you're basically giving your encrypted PayPal transactions to an attacker. So this should be heeded, in short, right? So, okay, I just talked about this. Just being mindful a bit about the time. I have a few more minutes. So disabling browser scripts. So that's a big thing. It's common practice nowadays for IT security professionals to install things like NoScript, ScriptSafe, JS Blocker. Websites nowadays want you to run all of these scripts, which are essentially programs in of itself, but you don't have to. A lot of them are adware related, they're tracking related, if not directly malicious. In Internet Explorer, there is, well, or rather, in Edge, there are the equivalents of creating security level so that unnecessary scripts won't be run. Now, for the last part of this short talk, I'll talk about two-factor authentication and how we practically want to use these. So a quick review. What are common authentication factors? You have something you know, which is your password. You can have something you have, which is your smart card or your mobile phone. And a third is something you are. That's your fingerprint, your iris. For your iPhone, you have your own face. Now, you want to use at least two of these to enable multi-factor authentication, like something I know, a password. Combine that with something I have. I'm the only one in the world with a mobile phone with this specific MS-ISDN and a unique IMEI. I want to validate to the website that not only do I know that password, but I have in my possession this phone. That website will validate that via SMS. Or another popular way is to use Google Authenticator, basically an OTP program, so that you don't need to send SMS transactions in case you are in an area without telco coverage. Okay, so those are basic ways to implement MFA, a one-time password indicating that you are holding a certain phone at that very instant. Now, I want to introduce LastPass. I mentioned a while ago that you must not reuse passwords for any reason, and yet all your passwords for all your websites should be very complex. Now, how the heck do you do that? How the heck do you memorize very complex 16 to 20 letter passwords that make no sense at all to for each and every one of your services? This is one way to do it. This is how Red Rock does it. And we suggest this a lot. Use a password manager that's integrated with your browser. That can be integrated with your browser, actually. You could use it as standalone apps in your phone. This would manage passwords for each of your online accounts. And this itself requires a master password with multi-factor authentication to access. And that's gonna let you generate a big secure passwords for every site that you want to sign up to as well. So what it looks like is I would have LastPass on my phone, for example. That's gonna need my Face ID. And once I unlock it with my Face ID, I still need to input an OTP, all right? And that's gonna give me a list of my accounts and passwords. Now, that can be automated as well when you use it as a browser extension. Your browser extension will be the one to fill up the login input fields of the website you are trying to access. So in short, basically, you don't have to memorize any password at all, except the LastPass password itself, all right? So what does it look like in practice? So let's say I want to log into my Google account. I'm asked by Google to provide a password, my email and password. However, I can't access LastPass yet. I have to unlock LastPass by putting in my master password and OTP. So if I go into Google, I log in, and I add that two-step, two-factor validation. I then put the OTP for Google itself from my Google Authenticator. That basically completes the whole thing. Okay. Again, to log, let me do that one more time. I open my LastPass to get the Google password. But to do that, I need my master password for LastPass, and I need to supply an OTP for that to LastPass. Only then can I get the Google password. And then once I sign in, I input my username and Google password, but I'm still required to get a OTP for Google itself. Okay, so here. So basically, that completes the sign-up process. So that basically concludes my talk. I want to thank everyone for listening in. Hopefully, I didn't take too much extension. So there we go. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.